We are Life Church Livonia.
All right, good morning, Life Church. How is everyone today? You guys good? Awesome, it's good to see you. I am so grateful that you chose to spend your Sunday morning with us here at Life Church Livonia. My name is Brian. I'm the pastor here, and I would love to have a chance to meet you after the service. If we've never had a chance to get to know each other, that would be amazing. And I'm really excited about today. I'm excited about an opportunity to wrap up the series we've been in called Address the Mess. And if you've not been able to be with us over the last few weeks, essentially what we've been doing is addressing something that I think all of us know is true, but we struggle to talk about. That life is messy. That life is messy sometimes because of what we do, that there's moments in our life, and for every single one of us in this room, where we have done something that's created mess in our lives. And other times there's messes that we didn't cause, but we experienced nonetheless. Messes that are created by other people who have done things or engaged in behavior that's trickled into your life, or sometimes not just trickled, but sometimes there's been a flood of mess as a result of what other people have done. And so the question that we've been asking is, well, what do we do with it? If that's the reality of life, that life will be and is and has been messy, then how do we address it? How do we respond to it? How can we name it in the church in such a way that people don't feel like they have to come and pretend like life's not messy? That people can come and be real in that, and people can come and they can find God in the midst of that and realize that God isn't afraid of your mess. And that actually, the opposite of that is that God's ready and willing to engage your mess and transform your experience of it in every way that you can imagine. And so, like I said, as today we wrap this up, what we want to do is really take an opportunity to address this one important kind of fact about messes, and that's this: that every mess comes prepackaged with bad options that will only make it messier. Every single mess. Think about this. You know, at Christmas when you buy toys for your children, sometimes they come pre-packaged with the batteries that make those things run. Well, our messes come pre-packaged with terrible options that if we choose those options, it only makes the mess messier. It's true whether it's something you did that made the mess, and it's also true if it's someone around you that you're in a relationship with, whether it's at work or whether it's at home or whether it's at school or wherever it might be. Every mess comes prepackaged with options that if we choose that option, it will only make it messier. Let me give you a couple of examples, and maybe you can relate to this in your own life. Think about maybe in your own situation or in other people that you know, situations where maybe there was a mess that was made financially. You're in a financial mess, and you have these bad options attached to it. You're like, well, I'm deep in debt right now, so my answer to get out of debt is more debt. Right? I think I have a friend that at one point was in deep credit card debt, and in order to pay off his credit card debt, he was actually using other credit cards to pay off his credit cards. That's a bad option that makes the mess messier. Think about with regards to lying. You get caught lying, and you know you're caught, and now you're in a bigger mess. And so instead of confessing and ending the cycle of brokenness, people make up bigger lies, and then they have to keep track of which lies they told to which people at what point, and it becomes this bigger, messier ordeal. Or maybe the times when you've done something that you know you shouldn't have done and you try to cover it up somehow. Maybe it's not through lying. Think about children. Children are classic for this. You come to your child. I've seen these videos online that I love where the mom or the dad are saying, so did you get into mommy's makeup? And the child's like covered in makeup. They're like, no, we didn't. Or it's like, did you get into mommy's lipstick? And you can see the spot in the carpet where they clearly tried to clean it and all they did was smear it everywhere. They made the mess messier. And so we do this, not just as children, but we do this as adults. And so ultimately the question we're asking today is, how do we avoid that? How do we live life in a different way? And I love what Lecrae said. He's a hip hop artist, and yesterday he went onto Twitter and on Instagram, and he said this. He said, yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I make hypocritical decisions. Yes, I fail and fall. I stumble. I struggle. And then he says this, I am a mess, but I'm God's mess, and he can turn a mess into a masterpiece. I love that. And that's what today is about. It's about asking the question, how can we allow God to turn our mess into a masterpiece and tell a different kind of story in our life? A story that we're proud to tell. And so my hope for you today is that as we engage God's word, that you will begin to see the value in turning your messes over to God. You'll begin to see the value in making good decisions in your life that don't actually add to the mess in your life. To not make decisions in the midst of your struggles that reflect poor character, low impulse control, or even a lack of wisdom. We want to choose something different than that because we will never be able to avoid the mess. You just can't do that because we're human. We'll always have it. But you can choose how you respond to the mess. And in so doing, partner with God in such a way that he can turn your mess into a masterpiece. And so the way we're going to go about this today is we're going to jump into the story of one of the most famous kings that Israel ever had. His name is King David. Many of you are very familiar with him. But if you read his story, you begin to realize that maybe his title should have been King of Messes. Honestly, because this guy's life was messy. So if you're not familiar with his life, let me just give you a brief little overview and you can begin to see how messy it was even from the beginning. Because as a young boy, a prophet of God anoints him as king while there was still a king. This is the beginning of the mess, right? Imagine how you would feel if you were king of a country and you heard that the prophet that was kind of like your prophet anointed someone else to be king. And you're like, wait a second, I'm king. Why would you anoint someone who's not even my son as king when I'm the king? It started David out in this messy part of his journey right from the beginning. And then it gets even messier because at one point, King Saul, who was the rightful king at that time, he was in kind of an impasse with an invading army. And there was this huge champion of their troops that would every day come out and mock them and say, send your best out to defeat me. And if you defeat me, we'll leave the field of battle. And they were at an impasse. No one would face him. No one would challenge him. King Saul didn't know what to do. And here comes little David, the shepherd boy, who'd already been anointed king. And he rolls up and he's like, I don't see what the problem is, people. Do you not trust God? Do you not trust that God will deliver you? I do. And he's like, I'll face him. And he does, and he wins. And all the soldiers and all the people are celebrating David, but Saul's heart is growing bitter and angry and fearful. He's like, who is this guy? Who's just this boy who's not even big enough to wear my armor, and yet he is now the hero of our people? And his heart begins to sour towards David. And the mess gets messier and messier and messier because what Saul does is he tries to eliminate the problem through all sorts of scheming and manipulation and machinations. Saul just handles the entire mess in a terrible fashion that actually makes it worse and worse over time. He does things that are meant to harm David, to discredit him in some way. At one point, he says, hey, David, I'd love to honor you and all of your heroic efforts on behalf of our country by allowing you to marry my daughter. And then Saul at the last minute pulls out and marries her to someone else. And trying to get David to respond and to react in such a way that would discredit him. And then Saul says, okay, well, I'm sorry it didn't work out with that daughter. I'm going to actually allow you to marry this other daughter of mine. But in order for you to do that, you have to win her hand in marriage. And he gives him an insane task. He says, I will allow you to marry this other daughter of mine, the second choice daughter, by the way. How would that make you feel if you were the second choice daughter? And he says, I'll allow you to marry her, but first you have to go into battle, and I want you single-handedly to defeat 100 men in the next battle. If you defeat 100 men, then you can marry my daughter. What is his hope? His hope is that David would die. It's a crazy task. He says, in the next battle, you're going to go in, all these people around you, and if you personally defeat 100, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage. He was hoping that David, out of this young man bravado, would be like, I can do this, and he would kill himself trying to win the hand of his daughter. And instead, what does David do? He didn't go and defeat 100 people. David went and defeated 200. 200. He rose to the occasion. And this actually made Saul even more worried and more upset and more angry because every moment that David has an opportunity to upstage Saul, he does. He doesn't do it on purpose. It's just who he is. It's who he is. And so Saul, he takes the story to the next level. It's no longer this subtle attempt to discredit him or this subtle attempt to eliminate him from the picture. He goes after him with everything he had. He gathers up troops and he pursues him with the intent to murder him. And so David flees with some of the troops that were loyal to him, and they're fleeing Saul. This is a messed up situation. Honestly, it doesn't get much more messed up than this if you're in David's shoes, and none of it was David's fault. David isn't doing anything wrong. He's simply being faithful to who God is calling him to be, and Saul, in all of his brokenness and all of his sin, is making the mess messier. And so the story reaches one of its climaxes in 1 Samuel 24. And this story is somewhat incredible. David's hiding from Saul with his men in the wilderness, and Saul's pursuing them. And here's what we find in 1 Samuel 24. It's talking about Saul here. He came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there. And Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. So this is exactly what you think it is. Saul stops. He has to go to the bathroom. And so picture this. You're David. There's a murderous king out to kill you. And so you hide from him in a cave, and the king decides that's the cave he's going to go number 2 in. This is exactly what happened in the story. And so it's kind of crazy that the Bible even tells us this, but this is what's going on, right? And so this is like the worst game of hide and seek you've ever played. Absolutely. So here you have this moment. Saul's going to the bathroom. David and his men are hunkered down in the back of this cave, hiding from the very man who's going to the bathroom in front of them. And this is what David's men said. This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. It's not the ending of the story that you would expect from a man that had been honestly sinned against over and over again by Saul. For a man like David who had been pursued by Saul for years, Saul had done awful things to him over and over and over again to the point of murderous intent. And David creeps up unnoticed, this guy in a very vulnerable moment. And he has every opportunity to kill him. And what does he do? He cuts off a corner of Saul's robe, and then he walks away unnoticed again, brokenhearted over what he's just done. He goes back to the depths of the cave, and Saul kind of goes on his way, and he lays into his men, and he says, how dare you encourage me to make the mess messier? How dare you encourage me to stoop down to Saul's level? Who do you think I am? Who do you think God calls us to be? Not the kind of people that stab people in the back to steal a throne while they're going to the bathroom. That's not the kind of man that God calls me to be. He says he calls us to be people of virtue, people of integrity, people of character. And after he gives a speech to his men, he goes out of the cave. He does what everyone else would say is the dumbest thing he could possibly do. He reveals himself. It's like he had won the game of hide and seek. And instead he pops out of hiding and he comes out holding this little piece of cloth that he cut off from Saul's robe. It says this, see my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there's nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I've not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. My hand will not touch you, David says. No matter what you do, no matter what you choose, I'm going to be the man that God calls me to be. And I'm going to give it over to you. God, I'm going to give it to you and let you take care of it. He says, I will not lay a hand on you. This is about the messiest family situation that you could possibly imagine. Because after David, he went into battle and he killed the 200 men, Saul honored his promise and David was married to his daughter. So now this is his father-in-law. That's why he comes out of the cave and says, Father, see this piece of your robe that I cut off? See what I did, what I could have done? It was such a big deal that he cut off the piece of robe because that robe represented Saul's authority. That robe represented his rightful rule as king. It was like if David had snuck up and broken a piece of the crown off. And David says, I will not be the man that you are. I will not stoop to that level. David knew something about mess. His entire life had been filled with it. And part of what I think David knew is this, is that at the root of most messes is a breakdown in virtue. At the core of most of the messes that you and I will face in our life is a breakdown in some place in our character, of integrity, of honesty, of self-control, of goodness. Think about the messes that you're in, and at the core of most of them, you can find in some way, shape, or form a space where someone, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else around you, had a breakdown in virtue. Their integrity was low. Their self-control didn't exist. You can see it in examples in your relationships, in your money, at your work, or wherever you find a mess, you'll find a breakdown in virtue, because breakdowns in virtue lead to breakdowns in life, and we call those messes. And David says, I don't want to be a part of that. He understood that you don't clean up a breakdown in virtue with another breakdown in virtue. Two messes don't make a right. It doesn't work that way. Two messes never make a right. And what we remember is that every mess comes pre-packaged with bad options, and those bad options are almost always a failure in virtue. And they become the options that we're most tempted to reach out and grab because they're expedient. The non-virtuous actions are expedient. They are a quick fix to the problem. Well, I was caught in a lie. I'm just going to lie again because that's easy. It's much easier than being honest and vulnerable, admitting that you messed up. Oh, I did that wrong. I'm just going to somehow cover it up through other messy things that I'm going to do. Oh, you wronged me. I'm just going to wrong you in return because that feels good in the moment, even though it doesn't settle anything permanently. And it only makes the mess messier. I'm in debt, I'll borrow more. I lied, I'll lie more. David knew that that was not the path that God was calling him to do. Killing Saul would have been easy for him. It would have been the easy option, the easy out, the quick fix. David was a warrior. He was a warrior of great renown. Killing Saul while he went to the bathroom would have been effortless for him, but it would have only made it worse. And David realizes this. Think about what would have been going through his head in that moment. If I do this, he's creeping up, he's got a sword in his hand. If I do this, what does this say about me? If I do this, I kill my king. If I do this, I kill my father-in-law. If I do this, I kill my wife's daddy. If I do this, my children will ask me, what happened to Grandpa? I killed him while I was going to the bathroom so I could take the throne and deal with my issues. That's not the story that David wanted to tell. Would he have been justified? Maybe. Was it expected? Absolutely. His men wanted him to do it. Would Saul have deserved it? Probably. Was it virtuous? Was it God-honoring? Was it right? Was it helpful? Did it make the mess less messy? Would it have made the mess less messy? Absolutely not. David did the right thing. If he had killed Saul in that moment, it would only have added something to a story that he would have been ashamed to tell later. Imagine him sitting with his kids years down the road and they say, Daddy, please tell us again about the way that you came to the throne. Tell us about the way that you became a king. And he would have had to have made up a false story because this one wouldn't have been worth telling. So David only takes a corner of the robe, and then he places the entire mess into God's hands. This is the model for how we respond. When we're tempted to grab hold of what's expedient, we're tempted to grab hold of what is easy, when we're tempted to deal with our mess by making it messier, we remember that the key is to act in a way that's virtuous, that's God-honoring, that shows your character, that shows your wisdom, that shows your ability to pause and to place something in God's hand and say, here it is, God, I give it to you. And sometimes we're really good at that, but we're really good at it temporarily. We say, okay, God, I'm going to trust you for the next 2 days. You have 2 days, God, or 1 week or 1 month to deal with this on your own, and then I'm going to step in and I'm going to do it myself. And we end up doing that, and then we make it messier and messier and messier. 7 chapters later, in the book of 1 Samuel, David becomes king. He becomes king the right way, the God-honoring way. God does his thing, and Saul ends up being defeated in battle, and David is anointed and placed as king. His story, his path, is now something worth telling because God is at the center of it. Every mess comes pre-packaged with bad options that will only make the mess messier. And God calls us to steer away from those, to move our life away from that. And what I know about your mess and my messes that we experience is that eventually the mess that you're in now could be reduced to 1 or 2 sentences. Think about this. I'll give you an example of in relationally. That maybe you can look back and you can say, yes, 6 years ago I was a part of a really bad divorce. And what I hope for you, for all of us, no matter what your situation is that instead of adding an and to the end of that story where you say, 6 years ago I was a part of a really bad divorce and it's been really awful since then and it's even worse than it was. Like our relationship is even more difficult now and our kids are kind of caught in the middle of it and I'm talking trash about her and she's talking trash about me and we're fighting over this and we're fighting over that. My hope is that you wouldn't have an and after that story, after that sentence, that you would have a but. You'd be able to say, yeah, 6 years ago, I was part of a really nasty divorce, but since then, God is telling a different story in my life. I chose character. I chose integrity. I chose virtue. I chose trust in God, and he is transforming my story and our story as a family. This is my hope. My hope is that God would take your messy story and turn it into a masterpiece because your response to the mess is the real story. Your response to the mess, God's response to our mess is the real story. We're no longer defined by those messes. We end up being refined by the messes. And it changes who we are. So the question that I ask you and the question that I ask us and my question I ask the church and myself today is, what story do you want to tell? What story will you allow God to tell in your life? Will it be a story of redemption? A story in which you trusted God to forgive you and to restore you, to not define you by that, but to refine you in the midst of that? Will it be a story of God making a masterpiece out of your mess? Will it be the virtuous option? Or will it be an ongoing saga of brokenness in your life? Will we become defined by that messy spot in our life? Or will we be refined by God? This is tough. It's tough, and honestly, we don't always get this right. And David didn't always get it right. His life didn't suddenly get unmessy because he sat on the throne as king. In fact, in a lot of ways, it got messier. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of flash forward a little bit later in his life. He's king now. He's ruling this country. And I want to point out a moment where he made some really bad decisions, where he actually made the mess messier. If you don't know his story, I want to fill you in a little bit on what happened. He one day is gazing out at his kingdom, and he notices a woman named Bathsheba. She's bathing on a rooftop, and he sees her naked. And he desires her, but she's already married to someone else. She's married to a man named Uriah, a man who was deployed at that moment for David, for the kingdom, in a battle. So David, in his sin and his brokenness, he sends someone from the royal court to retrieve Bathsheba for him because he desires her. He lays with Bathsheba, and she becomes pregnant. Her husband's away at war, and now she's pregnant with King David's baby, and David panics in the midst of the mess. He panics in the midst of the mess, and he immediately sends for Uriah, and he thinks to himself, well, if I can just get this guy to come home from war for a couple of nights, maybe he'll think the baby is his. So Uriah comes home, and he comes to the king, and he's reporting for duty, whatever it is they said, and David encouraged him, just take a night off. Go home, see your wife. Hint, hint. Go home, hang out, undo my mess, right? But Uriah is a man of integrity. Uriah is a man of character, and he refuses to go and be with his family when the rest of his men are still deployed in the field. He's confused, like, David, why would you call me back? None of the rest of my men get to come and see their wives, so I'm not going to go home and be with mine. I'm going to sleep with the servants. And David's like, you are not making this easy for me. So the next night, he's frustrated Uriah. He brings him into his kind of area where he hangs out and he's eating dinner, and he throws kind of a party for Uriah, and he gets him drunk on purpose. Talk about making the mess messier. He gets him drunk because he's hoping, well, maybe if he's drunk, he'll go home and he'll sleep with his wife, and he'll end up thinking this baby is his, and all of this problem, all of my sin will just go away. It's a massive cover-up, filled with brokenness and honestly, completely devoid of virtue. This is not the King David who chose not to kill Saul. It's someone different, someone who's gotten twisted up inside. But Uriah still does the right thing and goes and he sleeps outside with some of the servants once again. And then he goes, he comes back to David again. And this time David says, I'm done. And this is what he does. This is now in 2 Samuel chapter 11. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. Pause here for just a moment. Listen to what's happening. David has now become Saul. The man who God had judged and said, you are not fit to be king because of what you do and the kind of actions you take. David had become the person that was chasing him. With murderous intent, he's now killing people to cover up his own mess. And so he writes a note to the commander of the armies. He folds it up, he seals it with the royal seal, and he hands it to Uriah. And Uriah unknowingly, unwittingly, is walking back with his death notice in his hand. He literally carried the orders that would end his life to his commanding officer and handed it to him. So it goes on and says, so while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. And when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. David killed him. Not with his own sword, not with his own hand, but with his pen and a piece of paper, as he sent the order that killed the man whose wife he had impregnated. He made the mess messier. David's murder of Uriah is the definition of someone making a poor, non-virtuous decision that only makes a mess messier. And honestly, this moment became a defining moment for the rest of his story. For the rest of David's life. With a history now of brokenness within his family. He ends up, Uriah is dead, so he takes Bathsheba as his wife, and their first child that had been conceived out of wedlock ends up dying, and then there's more children, and then the children end up betraying each other and David, and there's murder, and there's brokenness. It's awful. The story is terrible. And David lives with the consequences of his decision for the rest of his life. So I ask you again, and I ask us as the church again, when you face your next big mess, what will define your story? Who will define your story? Will it be you making choices that lack wisdom and lack integrity, or will it be you handing your mess over to God and saying, God, I need you to make a masterpiece out of my mess. God, I need you to do something beautiful here because I want to do something awful. I want to retaliate. I want to get even. I want to cover up. Everything in me wants to sin. God wants to take your messes and make them into a masterpiece. But sometimes we want to return to the same old broken pattern, the same old broken story. What will you do? This is the choice that every single one of us has in the midst of our struggles. And honestly, it's the story, the struggle that we've had at times even as a church, because the last season of our life has been a little messy. Let's go back to what Jay talked about in his announcement earlier. The opportunity that we have to potentially merge with Trinity. We've been in a relationship with them for a long time. Imagine how hard that is for them. Imagine being a church that is struggling, a church that is declining, a church that is facing imminent closure. Imagine how much that hurts. Imagine how messy that is. And now realize that we stepped into the middle of that. Out of love and grace, out of a desire to see the bigger church in Livonia thrive, out of a desire to see more people, to leverage what we have and who we are for the sake of the kingdom, so that more people who are far from God can step into the grace and love and mercy of God. And it's been messy. It's been so messy, and it's been hard at times. And we've been living this to say, how will we respond in a way that is virtuous? How will we engage in a way that even if we don't ever, if nothing ever comes from this, if we end up here at this beautiful facility at Riley for another couple of years, I believe that by us choosing the virtuous, God-honoring pathway, that we will be a masterpiece. That God is making us into a masterpiece because in light of the way that we're engaging our story. I'm convinced of it. This is our story. To say, we will take the high road always. And that verse that we talked about, in everything we do, whether in word or deed, we do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, and God sees it and God honors it as we partner with him to do and be the right thing. If you are a follower of Jesus, or you desire to be a follower of Jesus, part of what you're getting here is an opportunity to no longer be defined by your mess. To be defined by the decisions you've made, or the decisions that were made on behalf of you. You don't have to be defined by that anymore. Not only from what happened in the past, but what will happen in the future. God will give you a pathway forward that will lead you out of your mess into this beautiful masterpiece of a story where you can now be, you can honestly just share your story and be proud of it. To be proud of the legacy that God has created in you, not because it points to how amazing you are, because it points to how amazing he is. This can become God's story in your life, the way that you respond to the mess. Because God wants to clean it up and make it beautiful, and we tend to make it messier. One of my heroes in the faith and one of the most encouraging authors to me as a pastor was Eugene Peterson. This is a man who just recently passed away. More of my pastor friends posted about Eugene Peterson's death than anyone I've ever seen, because this man wrote incredible books that he was like a pastor's pastor. And one of his passion projects was an opportunity that he took to take the Bible, and he went all the way through the Bible from cover to cover, and he wrote it out in his own words. The entire Bible, can you imagine this? Every passage in the Bible, he wrote into his own words. It was his passion project. It was his labor of love. And it ended up getting published, and we call it The Message. It's not a direct translation of the Bible. He didn't go back and translate word for word from the Hebrew to the English or from the Greek to the English. He just took the essence of what he believed the Bible was saying in each of those passages, and he wrote it out, and it's beautiful. And in Ephesians chapter 4, He does an incredible job of capturing the essence of God's heart for you, to transform you from a person that gets stuck in the same old patterns and the same old ways of living, in the same mess to messier ways of life. And he captures God's heart for that in Ephesians chapter 4. And this is what he says. Everything, and I do mean everything connected with that old way of life, has to go. It's rotten through and through. Get rid of it. And then take on an entirely new way of life, a God-fashioned life, a life renewed from the inside and working itself into your conduct as God accurately reproduces his character in you. I love that. God accurately reproducing his character in you so that you can become a person of virtue. You become a person that rises above the mess and becomes a masterpiece. It's God changing you and transforming you into the person over time that he made you to be. And he goes on, he says, what this adds up to then is this: no more lies, no more pretense. Tell your neighbor the truth. In Christ's body, we're all connected to each other after all. When you lie to others, you end up lying to yourself. Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as a fuel for revenge. And don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold in your life, because when you do those things, when you make the mess messier because of your actions, because of the lack of virtue, lack of integrity, the lack of character in that moment, what you end up doing is you hand the pen over to the enemy and you say, you write the rest of the story. You write the rest. Go ahead, write the rest of the story. I don't even care right now because that person, that situation, no. I don't even care right now. So we make a poor decision and we make the mess messier. And what we're saying is hand God the pen. Give the mess over to him and say, God, I need you to make a masterpiece out of my mess. And when we do that, we step into the life that Christ is inviting us into. Being a follower of Jesus isn't simply about forgiveness from our past. It's about that. It's about an opportunity to be right with God because of what Jesus did. It's an opportunity to leave that old life behind, just as we read about here in Ephesians 4. But it's not just about what happened, it's about what will be. It's an opportunity to step into a brand new way of living. And that's what I want to invite all of us into today. I want to invite you into a place where if you pursue this kind of life, it will allow you to tell the kind of stories about your messes that bring glory to God. It'll allow you to tell the kind of stories about your life that you're proud to tell. That this is the legacy that you leave behind. A legacy that doesn't point towards how awesome you are, but points towards how awesome your God is. I promise that none of your lives are as messy as David's were. And maybe if you look at your own family and you think, my family's a mess, I want to tell you, we're going to spend a few weeks about this starting next week, looking at families in particular and talk about what happens if there is a mess in your family. How do you deal with this? And we're going to give you really practical ways just deeply rooted in God's truth about who God calls you to be, specific examples of ways to live into this masterpiece. But for today, I want to invite you into two things. One of two things. The first is this. Are you in the spot where you know that you're making the mess messier? Today is an opportunity. I want to lead you through prayer to confess that to God. To just come before the Lord and say, here's the way that I'm contributing to the mess. Here's the way that I'm making it messier, God, and I just need you to forgive me for that. God will hear you. He will see you. He will respond to you. He will forgive you and wipe it clean. That's option number one. Option number two is then to after we've done that, to say, Lord, I need you to show me a better way. Because right now I can't really see the path. Like all I can see is the bad options. God, I trust you. Show me the way. Show me the path. Show me what it looks like to be a person of integrity, of deep character. God, show me the virtuous way. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we worship you in this place, just so grateful that you are a God who meets us in our messes. That you are not a God who stands removed and leaves us alone, but you are the God who wades right into the thick of it and you meet us there. And so God, right now, in the quiet of our own heart, from the depths of our very soul, God, we cry out to you. And we lay bare all of our behavior, all of our choices, all of our attitudes, all of our words, all of our actions, God, we give it all to you and we confess, Lord, there are times when we've made the mess messier. Jesus, forgive us in those spaces. Forgive us for the ways we've contributed. God, we ask that you would remove the stain of that guilt from our lives. That you would purify us from our own behaviors, our own responses. And that you would turn our mess into a masterpiece. God, we give it to you. We give our lives, our hearts, our souls to you. And Jesus, for those who are in this room who are in that place, who just gave all their messes over to you and their brokenness to you, God, I ask now that you would speak to them. That even right now, God, in people's hearts and minds, you'd begin to implant ideas about things they could do differently. A pathway forward, God, out of the mess into your arms. Into a path that honors you and glorifies you, into a space where they will have a story to tell 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, that brings you great glory. Reveal to us, God, what that path looks like. We trust you with our mess. And we pray these things in the name and the power of Jesus Christ. Amen.